wrestling with trying to coordinate various apps, and we keep making mistakes, but I think we've got it now. And as I hope many of you know, because that's why I assume you're tuning in, I'm John Vervaeke, and we're going to be doing a Q&A around the nature of practice, and that will also serve as a context within which we will also point to an upcoming intensive retreat spiritual exercise program that we're going to be running in early May in Toronto. So I'm going to pass everything over to Ethan right now.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, so the context for this Q&A was really around this incredible intensive that we're going to be doing in Toronto in just a couple of weeks. So I'm joined by Taylor Barrett, who runs Awaken to Meaning, Tataya Bailey, who is a deep embodiment practitioner. We are sadly missing Kasia Zaraski, who is also a dear friend and a powerful practitioner of authentic relating and circling and the subjective practices. And of course, our dear John Vervaeke. So pretty much all of the whole facilitation team is here. Now, rather than talking explicitly just about the intensive, there is an opportunity here, I think, for all of us who are facilitators and practitioners in our own right, to have a larger discussion around practice. And not just like, okay, exercises or making recommendations for procedural things that we can do, but what is the orientation that we bring to practice? And so when we take that into consideration with the May intensive, which is called Virtuosity in Action, then it calls into question this really, I think it's a lesser known word, or at least in the times, the ways that we've heard it is to do with something like music, virtuosity in music, for example. But what is it to embody virtuosity in life, like outside of an artistic context, right? In your relationships, the ways that one is a parent or a teacher or a colleague, something like that. So just to jump off of something that had been raised in the, I think the previous announcement video that we did was the titling of this intensive. And we're kind of walking around this thing of like, is it dancing with knowing and being? Is it wrestling with it? Like what's the most apt metaphor that we can use here? And so the way this will run is we'll just sort of throw this in um, as a kind of initial proposal or initial kind of a starting point. We'll do this for a few minutes, get the fire going, and then we'll open it up into live questions from the chat. Right. So I suppose I can preface this by saying, yeah, actually, maybe I'll open this up to the whole group. Like I've heard each of you talk about um, dancing and wrestling in different ways. And I'm wondering what is the difference for each of you? Like what is it qualitatively?
Do you mean literally or imaginally? What are we talking about?
Hey, let's do both. Let's
I
do
think it's
both.
imaginally though.
I mean, for me, I don't have a clean distinction because I do Tai Chi Chuan, which is both dancing and wrestling, and interfused between them. Um, and that's what I most deeply rely on when I try to understand uh, my connectedness and the affordance of reciprocal opening with reality. That the Tai Chi Chuan mode, and of course the music is in there too because I'm playing. So it's like, and that's where the dance comes in. But every move is a way. Like when you're practicing, you're fighting 10,000 people. So when you fight, there's no one there, and so that's an imaginal. There's always um, both aspects. And for me, um, I guess the dancing and the wrestling connote different dimensions of the same thing. Uh, the dancing connotes a kind of connectedness, an ability to constantly reattune oneself to what was unpredicted in the other. And that, as Rosa says, that's one of the necessary things for those moments of resonance that I think are the markers of how successful virtuosity in our life. Resonance is when reality seems to call us into a depth that was unpredicted but always welcomed and profound for us. Um, I think wrestling has to do with when um, resonance is on the cusp of horror, when it's on the horizon of awe, and there's being a challenge, like when Jacob wrestles with God in the Bible. There's a challenge to a fundamental new way of seeing and being in the world. So it's beyond resonance. It's there's so resonance calls us. That's the dance, uh, but we can also have resonance that demands from us, that challenges us. And for me, that's what the wrestling connotes. And I'm always trying to do both of those uh, uh, because there's a way in which reality flows in, shines, but and that's the dance, but there's a way in which it withdraws mysteriously. And that often calls for wrestling from me. And so that's my initial take on what it means for me, the dancing and the wrestling. But as I say, I see them as deeply uh, interwoven together because resonance is on a continuum from resonance to something like awe, which uh, awe takes you into the desert. It challenges you to reconceive, be renamed. That's what happens when Jacob wrestles with God. He is renamed, and a nation is like properly founded. And there's a and the whole nation takes up a wrestling with God. Um, and of course that's why Jordan Peterson has named his recent book that he's trying to get on the fact that the sacred is properly numinous. It's fascinating. It draws us in resonance, but it also is terrifying. It borders on, it shakes us, it challenges us beyond ourselves. Um, and so I think of the two together as interwoven as the appropriate attitude and affordance of our relationship to what's sacred.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly like that in the distinctions between the two. Contextually, I think more for, the idea of the intensive and sort of it as a tagline. I like dancing because I think dancing more directly sort of implies like you can dance with yourself, right? You can dance with other or others. I mean, you can do that with wrestling too, of course, but it's really just speaking to the scope or the breadth of, sort of the intensive in that we're going to work the muscles of knowing and we're going to work the muscles of being, and we want them to like integrate together. We don't want to just like isolate, and go into a DID or something like that and only think propositionally. God, we don't want to do that, but we want to do it in an embodied way, right? So it's like, what's it like to speak propositionally from an embodied perspective? Like, how do I communicate with more of my full being? So I like that idea of dancing to make sure that sometimes we're leading. So sometimes we'll be leading with knowing. Sometimes we'll be following with knowing, and somebody else is bringing their knowing and being. So to me, it's more like the flow. I like more of the idea of the flow. I'm sure people will be wrestling with a number of things, but I'm hoping they're not wrestling between whether or not they're going to do knowing or doing being. Implies somebody has to win out there. And I think I like the dance is, we're both winning, even if I'm leading and you're following, or you're leading and I'm following, there's something to be learned. So I think that's maybe the distinction I would make, at least specifically to this particular context. Um, we'll definitely be wrestling with things, but I don't know if it'll be between those two. For some of us, it will be. Some of us are a little bit stronger in the knowing and the propositional, and being sort of allowing that to sort of place that aside and be more oneself can be challenging. So there'll be a wrestling there. So I suppose we could have called it that too. And the opposite's true as well. Many years in authentic relating, worked on a practice that started to bring in more of subjective opinion into the space, and I saw how people really challenged to do that, to really own a particular position and make a proposition about something and stand in their truth about that, from that direction too. So, there's a challenge in both ways. But I think I just like more the idea of us sort of dancing together. That sounds a little bit more fun, a lot more flow, much more dynamic. Yeah, so that's what I'd say.
What's coming up for me, Taylor, is in my experience, the moment I say or set the intention to dance or step into the experience of dancing, I'm going to encounter what gets in the way from like being 100% in that experience of allowing that. And so I'm chuckling in the dancing and in the wrestling because my imaginal is that when we step into that room all together, committed to have an experience with a desire to dance together, then there's a bunch of material that's going to show up that each participant will become the workshop, and then we'll get to then work with what arises in the room in a way of wrestling to polish the art of dancing together. And that for me feels like the juice of the experience. Yeah.
Hmm.
I don't know if I have a delay in my video. It seems like I do. I want to check with you guys.
The production, I think, should be okay. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like what's been said. It's something that's been common in kind of everybody's pieces is that it's not binary. It's not one or the other. We either only dance or we only wrestle. And in some cases there's a progression, right? But there always is this uh maybe this starts to collapse in on itself, but like dancing and wrestling seem to be dancing and wrestling with each other. Sometimes you got to do more of one than of the other. And at least that is true enough. My audio seems to be low. um yeah, that's at least true enough of like my experience around kind of how to engage with not just a workshop setting or other people, but on a broader context, more with virtue. Sometimes it calls me to be in a deep confrontation that's kind of crunchy or like difficult, or like I want to run away from it in some way. But it's like, no, I got to stand my ground and make sure I don't get pushed out of the ring. And then at some, like if I do that for long enough, I start to learn how to catch the weight of it, right? Like if something is in a sense like particularly heavy for me to think about or face, I get a little bit used to kind of like holding it like, oh, it's that thing again that thinks I'm not good enough, or it's that thing again that judges myself too harshly. Okay, how do I treat it differently this time? How do I look at it in a different way? And that takes getting used to. Sometimes it's the opposite, where it's like I let it I get away with it because maybe my partner is happy to keep taking care of me when I feel down, and it's like, oh, I get a hot chocolate all the time because I don't feel my best. And in a way I can lean into that, but it's also worth it to sort of hold off and go like, sorry hon, maybe not today for the marshmallows, but I want to spend some time to really get a sense of what is it if I feel this thing, if I let myself be in this edge or at this edge. And that's where something new sort of appears. So I really love what's already happening in the chat, where folks are kind of throwing in questions that seem to serve as actually quite nice jumping off points. So is there anything that like any folks want to sort of just say, or just to reply to something else someone has said? If not, we can start taking questions. Yeah, John.
I just want to say one thing, and I want to highlight that all of this is oriented towards virtue. That's the Socratic, Platonic element of it. And part of this is a way to challenge people and to recover what virtue actually is. We have tended to reduce virtue into the assertion and the obedience to rules of behavior. So that's what it is. And that largely comes from Kant, and I won't go through the labored philosophical history that has insinuated into the very sinews of our psyches. But I want to move back to a Platonic notion where virtue, and Aristotle plays an important role here. Virtue is not just about your beliefs and then an obedience to an assertion or a command. Virtue is also the cultivation of skills. And that's where you can hear some of the connection to virtuosity. It's about, so if I'm honest, I have to not only believe certain things, I have to have certain skills that I have to be able to bring to bear on situations where honesty is required. I have to know how to be honest. And then there are states. I have to know what it's like to be honest. I have to have a touchstone that I can measure against. Oh, that's what it's like to be honest. And often we catch that from other people in an imaginal way. Oh, that's what it's like to be honest. And then I can refine my skills. I know how to be honest. But that eventually has to become a trait of character. We have to practice that on those beliefs and those skills and states until the point where they become traits, where they become habits that we deeply identify with. Our identity and those habits are interwoven
Yeah.
such that we have deeply endorsed them with our sense of self. Um, and that's what a virtue is. And so in this retreat intensive spiritual exercise program, um, you're going to be touching all of those. Of course, we're going to be giving you propositions that we hope you will believe. None of us are liars, uh, right? But we are more importantly, we're going to be teaching you skills, and we're going to help you conduce you into states that will act as a touchstone for those virtues. And then we'll give you some sense of what it is like to engage in a ritual around this so that you can practice it until it becomes traits. That's what we're doing in this intensive. And is really, really important because as AGI becomes more and more pronounced, propositional tyranny, living just in our head, identifying just with our beliefs, is going to become insane. And we're going to lose the capacity which we most need right now. And this is what this intensive will really help. It will help you to remember, to recover, to re-identify with what virtue genuinely is. And that's why thinking of it in terms of virtuosity, not just virtuosity of skill, but virtuosity of trait and of state. That's what this is all about. I just wanted to put that out because this is very important. What does this have to do with virtue? Right? We got to get rid of virtue is about obeying rules that we assert.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean that's beautiful, John. And I like that you came in with it because I was kind of talk about the idea of like one of the benefits of intensive, like what does the container of intensive offer us? And I think there's just something about that building of complexity that gets us to a point of contact, like such that we embody that experience, that state that you're talking about, and it's like there for us. And when we leave the space, we can call back onto it. I'll call back onto those moments of like, I thought I was being really, really honest in that moment, but actually it doesn't feel like I was when I was being honest here. And I knew I was really being honest. Like it, there, I use the word imprint. It kind of can create an imprint that we can use, that we carry forward into our life. So yeah, I think that's one of the things intensives provide that sometimes other containers don't. Like you do a training and you have to go out and apply it somewhere, but this is in action. We're coming together and we're actually doing the thing as a group. Using that distributed cognition, the collective intelligence to provide us these opportunities to have deep contact with one another and these virtues, such that it creates an imprint. So yeah, exactly. That's exactly and why we want to do an intensive.
I want to touch in on a question that's come in through the chat, and this was sort of like explicitly alluded to by John, especially when we're talking about skills, developing skills. Elizabeth asked a question of what might technique in knowing and being look like. And will these be taught in the intensive? So there's a way in which we can sort of like talk a little bit about the structure, or at least give some pointers in that, but within context of this question. So what does technique in knowing and being look like?
Go ahead, Taylor.
Well, actually, I noticed I'm sort of putting you on the spot, Tataya. I kind of actually want to hear Tataya speak to this, but I also want to sort of articulate like that idea of teaching. Um, with this particular intensive, like there's teaching, but it's implicit. The idea is to create a journey. Like this is really about an experience rather than like, procedural. Like this isn't going to be a lot of procedural knowing. Yes, we'll bring some things forward that have structure, but it's like the structure is only in the service of us moving together and flowing together on this sort of journey from day to day. So I want to sort of highlight that, like, there will be a learning, there will be novelty, there will be things that you integrate and, tools and everything else, but it's all very implicit. There's not a lot of lecturing or anything like that. We're not bringing generally new ideas. We're just being together in a particular framed way that is very conducive to adding that complexity, and you either move forward or you sort of regress. But of course, with all these facilitators with decades of experience, hopefully we are supporting everybody to move forward. But that is sort of the conundrum in terms of development that will happen. That'll be the thing you'll have to wrestle with at various points throughout the intensive. But yeah, I'm really sort of curious as to Taya, what you might say about this, because I just sort of I see you and the work that you do is very much centered in this particular area.
Yeah, thank you, Taylor. It the question brings me back to my body and the the dance between knowing and being and the different types of intelligence. And so in my experience, there is an infinite amount of information in our bodies that we generally don't tap into. We are used to relying on what we know, and the mind is so strong, habitually kicking in. And the opportunity of the workshop is to actually have a space and have practices that allows you to pay attention to different parts of yourself that you normally don't, like your body and like the nature of your body that wants to move or wants to react or wants to respond in relation to someone else or a situation that we bypass in day-to-day life because the mind is really quick to make meaning. And so what part of the practices that I'm bringing is not talking about, not relying on what you know, but navigating the territory of moment to moment emergence, following the impulses of the body and learning how to trust the compass of your body. Whether it's accurate or not, it doesn't matter. It's the signal that comes from your body in the relational space that affords actually the mutual reciprocal opening that feels counterintuitive because we haven't spent much time developing the skill of following and trusting that which in ourselves, like animals, instinctual animals. So we are tapping into a greater intelligence in the body that it's most of the time surprising, because the thing that you're expecting it's going to happen, because we're also very set up to survival and to protect ourselves. We're going to go straight through that to discover on the other side that there's really no tiger in the room, and that allowing yourself to go through that with another opens whole new levels of experience and realities that in my world um, bring about the beauty, bring about the 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 resonance, like John was saying, bring about really a whole new world of navigating connection and contact in that mutuality.
I want to pick up on what Taylor and Tataya said, because the problem we have is there's different meanings of technique. One meaning of technique is something like a formula that you can apply, and it is guaranteed to give you a certain set of results, sort of like a recipe for action. We won't be giving you that because we don't think that that is appropriate to the kind of knowing that Tata is talking about. There's another sense of technique that comes out of pedagogy, which is the idea of a scaffold. What we can do is give you imaginal and intentional scaffolds that help you get to a place where you can then pick up on what you need to know. And what that is often doing is helping you take something from your body that you've been ignoring, as Tataya said, recognize it, think about the word, recognize it, recognize it, and make it available for being drawn up, exapted into right your cognitive awareness and your reflective cognition. And that's what we're doing. We're scaffolding for exaptation. We're not giving you recipes for what you should do in an invariant manner in every way of your life. Um, uh, I, those when people give you recipes, this is obviously a heuristic I'm going to pronounce. Be very suspicious. Okay, be very very suspicious. Um, that's there's a kind of hubris in that that is the hubris of modernity, that we can build technologies that will command and control nature and bring us into godhood. And you're doing little idolatrous versions of that. If you're I'm not accusing anybody of anything. I'm telling you what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid that kind of here's the magic formula. We don't do that. We can't do that because we are deeply in service to something. We are not sorcerers. We are trying to help you come to a recognition and re-realization of who and what you can be.
Yeah, and I mean everyone's different too. So I mean,
Yeah,
even just the idea is in so many ways preposterous. We're all going to come in with different histories and experiences and different capacities into this space. Hopefully, well, not hopefully, I'm pretty sure of it. The beauty of being able to do that and to have all these different experiences, people, all these different ages, a life experience, and even just the experience across the facilitation team. Like, just talk about sort of having, I think what John's often talking about is a lot of opportunities for opponent processing. Um, like John talks about, like read multiple books at a time, and there's something about that. Like, this is the ecology of practices, do multiple practices at a time, and to see how they inform one another. So yeah, yeah, I mean, John said it well. That's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, I think I'm something sort of like sparked for me when I heard you speak, Tataya, about sort of the forgotten ways of knowing. And I think so what sort of comes up for me is like, just because I can't represent it abstractly and conceptually doesn't mean that I don't know it. And just having to take that shift really lands something for me. So for example, I recently picked up guitar properly. I've been playing on and off for a lot of my life, but I never really committed to it. And there was just something in the way of like getting deeply into practice. Some of it had to do with relationship with my father and music and all that, and just having had to take a turn, to really sort of be with it in a different way. Now, I won't say that I know how to play guitar, which is odd, but I also wouldn't know what the answer to that. I don't know how I would explicate that conceptually, even if I said I did. Right. Well, I know that B is here, and if I slide it, it will make this sound. Like that. That's not it. Right. It's a different kind of transmission, and it's a different kind of participation. Right? I can't explain music in a book. So this is a question that sort of came out of the chat, which I want to sort of lean into, which is what if it is directed, so it has a goal, right? In this case, the example is sport. So the question that was asked is, how does playing a sport work in relation to virtuosity and action? And so in this case, it's like it's different from playing music. It's more, it's directed in the sense that the sport has very clear rule sets, and you have a goal, you have an orientation. And in the case of our intensive, that direction and the orientation is virtue. So, how does what makes the orientation to virtue actually transferable such that maybe it makes me a better music player or it makes me a better sportsman? What is it about virtue that, when oriented towards, allows for a flourishing?
Well, sport used to be, Athloy, the great feats. The point of sport was arete, excellence, to show excellence. And excellent arete is a Greek word that covers both virtuosity and virtue. So you could have arete in archery, which isn't necessarily what we would consider a virtue today, but we could definitely say somebody has virtuosity. And then you get bleed between them. You've got, Zen in the art of archery. Well, there's archery can be give you a way of practicing Zen. Um, and this was always implicit, I think, in sport. The British sort of developed this notion of a virtue, being a good sportsman, which was the point of sport was a ritual. You're supposed to develop, practice courage and cooperation and the ability to accept defeat graciously. These and the, so there was a practice in training, and we know that sport is ritual, and the idea was if people played sports well, uh, courage and cooperation and the acceptance of failure would transfer broadly and deeply into human lives in an enriching way. And this was a great idea behind sport. And I think it really picked up on the Greek heritage in a nice way. We've largely lost that. We've lost way even before social media, regular TV. Think about McEnroe, if anybody of you know who I'm talking about from tennis. And we started to be find that antagonism and an adversarial and aggressive, right, stance was way more salient and therefore attractive, and right, and so that narrative overtook sport to a very very large degree. I remember I'm a Canadian, and so the deep drought in the 70s of hockey, when hockey became just sort of thug hockey, and people just basically, trying to bruise each other into submission. Um, and I think if if we're doing what we hope and aspire to do in this intensive correctly, uh, we can recover what sport for the Greeks, and at least in its best version in our British heritage, um, which I'm emphasizing right now because I'm Canadian and I'm standing against America. La 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 la. Um, um, I think we can get it back. Um, and if we do, I mean, for those of you who are athletes and play sport, this would presumably transfer into your sport and then enhance the way in which your sport transfers into your life. So that would be my answer.
I love that answer. I just want to take this opportunity, and I kind of wish Christopher was here, also as a Canadian, to sort of plug the show Shoresy, which I know he and I both have a deep love for, which is a very Canadian show. But there's an interesting way in which you can actually also see like the centrality of hockey for them in this particular show, and how the aspects of it that mold them into good people.
Mhm.
Yes, there's some outlandish aspects to it, of course. There's the comedy, there's the drama of it. But there's something about that show that I think just sort of touches, at least for me anyway, I don't speak for anybody else here. It touches into a real sort of sweet spot of the way in which it accepts people for really who they are, but the way in which it also like valorizes, what is generally considered some form of normalcy, maybe within Canadian culture and culture around hockey. So just hearing John sort of say that, it's triggered that thing for me. Is like, oh, that's an interesting sort of example, very implicit, of course, of the importance of virtue and virtuosity. And there's a lot of sort of dancing between different ways of being and knowing, I would say, too, in that show. So if you're ever curious to sort of check that out, I'd love to hear what people have to say about it, if they see the same thing in it that I see.
Ted Lasso does the same thing.
Yeah. I think that's fair. Yep. Yep. I just think Shorzy is a lot funnier, but that just speaks to my sense of humor. And Ted Lasso was fantastic. It was, definitely chef's kiss, but there's something about Shorzy, just the show creator of it, and the way in which it really touches into Canadian culture.
Yeah, that it does have that Ted Lasso doesn't have.
Yeah.
Yeah, Taylor's been trying to get me onto Shorzy for like 2 years. It's just like,
Yeah.
so occasionally send me clips. Tataya, is there something here for you?
I'm sitting with knowing and being that dance in my personal life, and given all the years of experience that I have with embodiment and cultivating the being, um, uh, what what comes up for me is where the rubber meets the road. That transference that we're talking about. I'm a mother of 3 teenagers, and every context like calls forth or requires something of me. In that living with virtuosity, like I can see, even though I have the skills and I can um, perform, let's say, in a way, or access a ground of being in many, many contexts of my life. There are particular contexts like mothering that really shows me, okay, where I'm at in a particular place, or where's my growth edge. And so I'm thinking about the workshop and what the opportunity that we have to um, go through an arc of experience, to receive some imprints, to be able to know that we are capable of something together, take that home, and then that's where the rubber meets the road. And so I'm thinking of the transference, and how the ongoing living with virtuosity has been for me is like the humility I feel in a parenting moment, when I have shortcomings, or I don't, I'm stretched to allow and to welcome the experience of my teenager, and my mind getting in the way. So I'm thinking about real life contextually, how the places where we get to practice, and where I meet my growth edge. That's what the conversation where it led me. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that, in the transference of what we're gonna practice and receive in the workshop to bring home, than to live that, or be in the continuation of that, in the through line of how that actually impacts the relationships or the context that really matter to you, like parenting for me.
I can speak to that quite strongly, actually. I think there was a period of time where I perhaps wasn't looking for the transfer as much as I was looking for like acquisition. So I just want to get the skills, right? Like I want to do the practices, do the authentic relating really authentically. And to kind of like almost modularly stack these things on top of me. And it created a kind of unhealthy distance with folks. It became something of like, it's like every interaction was the needed to become a DID, even with the people that I cared the most about. And they don't have context for that, right? So that the context isn't set up for that. We're not setting up to do practice. We're not in that frame. So it just feels like I'm showing up to this conversation in a way which is trying to, I don't know, like I'm playing my game and everybody else is just like, you know, pawns on the chessboard or something like that. I'm painting it more negatively, but I'm trying to give like a very clear example of how it can be potentially malformed. And over time, like what has really helped um is being able to kind of just like sit back on that a little bit, like keep the practice within context, keep it with folks who, hey, we're stepping into the ring together to do the idea. We're stepping into the ring together to do triple S, the Socratic search space, which we're doing in this container, right? We're gonna meet for AR, even just like messaging somebody and going, hey man, Could we spend an hour and play some like authentic relating games just to warm that muscle up a little bit? And being able to do that meant that okay, this is the place where like I'm really sharpening the knife, or like sharpening the edge of where I can grow, and then to be able to like take that bandwidth that's been earned and then go out into the world and like okay, release it a little bit. Let's just see what stayed from that, you know. And I want to, someone asked the question of like can you compare pro sport versus unpaid sport, right, with respect to virtuosity in action, which I think is a really interesting question because I used to do MMA, and now I do like more aikido, like martial arts that is non-competitive, and it's a very different orientation. It speaks something to this more hands-offness. If we do the practice, it's building a certain kind of constitution that's going to be there when you're not doing it, right? Something's going to remain. It's not a, you're not trying to map, or at least I'm not trying to map the skill one to one, whereas like now everyone has to speak a certain way. But there's something about doing it that warms the muscle up, that gets it kind of in shape, so that when I need to be there for somebody in a different way than I might be used to, it's available. I think that's where the transfer is. It's so context sensitive that one has to be like alive and awake to it at the time that it emerges, as opposed to it having been sort of set up and made instrumental. You know, do mixed martial arts because you can get into the UFC and make some money. I just want I just want to be steady on my feet when I walk, man. Something like that. Yeah.
Well, the martial arts are very interesting, and I remember talking with Dr. Rodney King about this. Uh, so we went very far into Wu with a lot of the martial arts, and people were abusing the imaginal and making outlandish claims, and outlandish claims that were all often in the service of their ego being aggrandized or being able to manipulate and control other people. And then there was, of course, a counteraction to that, and MMA was part of that, which is they go in and they basically kick the asses of so-called masters. Um, the problem with MMA is we've swung too far the other way, which is you're doing MMA just to fight and to fight well. You like if you're living well, you may never fight, and if you do, you may fight once or twice in your life, and it's good to be able to defend yourself. I believe that. I practice. But if that was the sole reason why I was pouring hours every day into my practice, I would be a fool. Tens of thousands of hours for like this and this, that's too far the other way. And we have to come back, and this is Aristotle and how we cultivate virtue. We have to find the golden mean. We have to enrich these things with, right, both the imaginal, but also with functionality, but not a specific. And I think this is really really important, right? For me, I really got what Tai Chi meant when I saw how it was showing up outside of context that I would call martial arts context or fighting context. When it showed up in how I was dialoguing with other people, when it showed up in how I could deal with somebody who was like really imposing in a conversation. That is where I got it. That's neither woo nor is it this over fixation on fighting. It's about the cultivation of character. That's all those dimensions I talked about. Um, so I, I think it's very, very important to understand that we in this intensive are trying to also find that golden mean. Because there's people that are going to be coming in here, right, and right, and they're going to be wary of woo, and they should be, and we are too. And there's going to be people who are coming in here who don't want to learn how to fight, or like they're not right. They want something else. They want something that leads into their life in a much more comprehensive manner. Um, and I think I think what we're offering is a better program for tutoring people in their character than what the martial arts have generally become. And I'm a martial artist, and I've practiced for over 3 decades, and I love it deeply. But I find the martial arts, and many martial artists agree with me on this. I talk to them. We're we're oscillating between these two extremes, neither one which is conducive to the cultivation of virtue. Escapist woo does not cultivate virtue. It does not help you confront reality. Aggressive fighting, that's not the cultivation of character. That's not the cultivation of virtue. I think what we're offering in this intensive, and I say this as a long time practitioner and somebody who is deeply loves martial arts, and I practice several, I think what we're offering here is better. It really is.
Yeah, the thing that comes up for me hearing you say that, John, is sort of how my perception, sort of in the culture, of how much fighting there is. The othering, the problems out there, the problems out
Yes.
there, the attention doesn't come back, and I get it. There's a lot of challenging things, and I think a lot of us are in a certain kind of survival mode, and it's very hard in the survival mode to be able to learn new tricks and to move out of that. It's a very difficult thing, and it feels, and I mean, I think you're talking about this when you bring up AGI. It's also imperative. There's just a way in which you know so many of us are not really taught. You go through high school, some people go through post-secondary, and even the question about what you take away from that now, maybe you'll get a job, but how much does it really set you up for everything else that we're experiencing in the culture now? And in my opinion, in so many ways it doesn't. So it's sort of this continued education through the process of unfolding, the process of another group in the past, you used the term undamming. Like, it's a process of undamming yourself from what society is sort of placed and what you've picked up and taken that doesn't serve you. So there's just something about this, the work that we're doing, this particular container offering that opportunity for that undamming, offering that opportunity. We talk about the optimal grip, the right stance to help us react, but not like react as in reactionary, but like to react and to be responsible in the direction of mitigating the challenges that you talk about, the perennial problems, but there's also the social ones as well. Anyhow, sorry.
Well, no, I thought what you just did there was brilliant. You're right. The problem I was seeing in the martial art is representative of a deeper pattern where we oscillate between fighting the other and indulging ourself.
Yeah.
And right, and the indulging the self is the woo, and the fighting the others, I'm going to pursue victory. Philonikeia, as Plato would say, and we're trying to break you out and break you through from both of those.
I want to double click on that, because actually I think there's a question here which is really important. I want to bring the tie in on this, because this is something which I really trust your opinion on, which is that there is the indulging oneself and the fighting the other, but there's also fighting oneself. And there's a way in which that there's a punitive element that can arise in practice, right? So Eric asked this wonderful question in the chat of how important is forgiveness when it comes to any virtue that someone is working on. I believe many get stuck dealing with the wrong notion of forgiveness and not being able to progress. And Tataya, I think we've talked a lot, especially in the last sort of structuring call, like agape love, like played such a big part of that conversation, is a big part of the work that you do as well. And I wonder if you can speak to this a little bit.
The conversation that we were having around agape love is the definition itself about the sacrificing oneself for personhood to support someone else. And my experience of agape love is of no sacrifice, is being in a place where I am that for another person, or the space for another person, where being embodying agape love, it's emanating, and there's a win-win. There's no the other and myself. it's the ground of being. Actually, it's beyond myself that arises when the in my experience the unconcealment of these tender or parts that have been hurt, or parts that we cannot accept about ourselves, finally have a space to be seen. It's like brought into the light, like when we speak about shadow work, when those parts have a space to exist without judgment, but just to be with those. And the what I witness as the powerful healing ability that agape love has in the face of another being in pain, whether is them beating themselves up for something they did that they can't forgive themselves, or something that was done to them in their narrative, it it dissolves. And this is maybe where the woo woo comes in, the magnitude of love for the other. It's beyond myself. I don't need anything from the other, but it arises, and that has been one of the most transformative moments that I've seen over and over again, uh, that then allows the person or this part to kind of rest. And if we go back to the amygdala, in my experience, being a little bit more technical, the the event that happened that got attached to the amygdala, that got kind of like stuck there, it releases through that process. And biologically, oxytocin gets released. And so that's the experience of agape love that I know. And I'm very curious to dance and play with the definitions and the propositions, with the actual enactment and inhabiting that together as a group, because every time more nuance arises, and um, it's always ever growing. Yeah.
So I'm just reading the chat. There's something really interesting here, which is this question of like, is your is well, there's a question here of to you, Tataya, of like, how do you do that?
Mhm.
Um, and it's like a very explicit Christian tone around it, which is to what does it say? You love the other as yourself.
Mm.
And I think that's sort of what I hear you pointing at is like, there's no sacrifice because it's not an exchange. Right? I'm not doing something for you, and then it's that there is a oneness, and therefore there is no
Yes.
otherness.
I
I'm
just want to be clear.
Yeah.
Agape doesn't mean sacrifice of the self. It means sacrifice of egocentrism.
I
That's
Mm.
okay.
Hmm.
Um,
Thank you, John.
Mhm.
say more. Leh. Yes.
it's not that you lose agency or you're destroying yourself in agape. You are orienting, right, what your agency to completely towards the benefit of the other. So it's a non-egocentric orientation to your agency.
Service.
Yes, it's service.
Mhm.
It's so you're not if you mean by a self a temporally extended agent that can reflect, that is not being sacrificed in agape. That is coming to a kind of fullness in that what the self wants is to be in contact and in gratitude, service to something other than itself.
Mhm.
And that's what agape is. Um, so I understand the critique that you're both making, because we have trivialized, um, and part of it, part of it is because the prototypical symbol of agape in Christianity is Jesus is crucifixion, and we're coming up on Easter, so this is relevant, right? And we see it as his death. But the point is, you don't understand the crucifixion if you don't put it in the context of the resurrection. That's the point of
Mm.
Easter. Jesus doesn't destroy himself, right? He gives himself over to the service of others and he becomes glorified by doing that, right? And we've trivialized it to the Rambo who's willing to die or something like that. That is to mistake um, a common means of expression for the goal of the expression of agape. Sorry, I didn't want to intervene too much, but I just want to be clear. Um, like agape isn't sort of suicide for another person.
Yes.
But it can feel like it to some people
Yes.
who don't have not achieved uh, I don't know what I'm like, right orientation. I'm trying to find the right word.
Well, I think it's more what Tataya represents. I think it's, if you mean by orientation, a deep sense of origin in their body and a deep sense of openness to something beyond them and that's more ultimate to them. I
Sure.
think that is it, but that can't be spoken into existence. That has to be practiced into existence, and I think that's what the heart of what Tataya is doing.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. It's like if I consider myself to be this like locked in tank of resources or something that then has to be periodically emptied out and then have tributes made to other similar tanks that share some kind of space with me, I'm screwed. But I think that's what it's been reduced to, almost kind of like hydraulic thing. But
Yeah.
actually, I think what you're pointing at, what all three of you are pointing at, I think the standpoint of which your work, the tire begins, and I know this having participated in it, is that it's not like I'm a tank of like karmic resources. Is that this is constantly a process. So even if I'm in service of others, that interaction, that relation, is also part of the process of forming the self,
Mm.
right? And then that's going to keep going with others as well. And that's just there's no point where it gets like coalesced into a bank that I now put aside and then count on a checkbook for the rest of my evening. Like, yeah, that cat really needed my help. I'm glad I sacrificed the 3 seconds that I took to cross the street to help it. Because we can't account for all of that. So I want to just name that I'm aware of time. So perhaps like Taylor, do you mind sort of like speaking a little bit about the offer that we have for folks who are watching the Q&A live, and then maybe we'll just do a last round of kind of like final words for the next couple of minutes before we close off.
Yeah. I could do that. So I mean, we're actually down to our last. Looks like our last 4 spots. And so I'll throw a coupon code into the chat here and get $300 off the current price up until tomorrow at midnight or something like that. Because really, what we're trying to do here with these last 4 spots, like we think so, our cap is at 20, and we feel like 20 is the right sort of sweet spot for this space. So we're at 16 right now. I'd love to hit 20. I think 16 will be beautiful too, but it'd be great to hit 20. We have the resources for it. And I'm just trying to do this in service of maximizing the experience for everybody. And I think 20 is sort of that number where it's still intimate enough that it doesn't become overwhelming, and it's not so expansive that people can sort of hide, and sort of tuck away in the corner and not get any sort of attention, because sometimes that's just a thing that we'll do. We'll come into a space and sort of hide. So there's something about the sweet spot here, so I'd love to see us hit that particular number. So in that, I mean, if the $300 is still not sufficient, even though we finished our scholarship piece, and that sort of expired a few days ago, after a number of days, somewhere in the next week, I mean, we may still have a couple spots. So I'll also throw the link. Maybe I don't know if we can put it in the show notes or not. A link to the scholarship application form. And if we still have some spots, like a week, obviously it's gonna be very last minute, a week or two out. I would still like to see those get filled with people that are in good alignment to what it is that we're doing. So I mean, still fill it out. It might work out. We may not fill those spots, and then we would love to fill them up. With people who apply and are in good alignment. So yeah, did I forget to mention anything? I think was it just those three things? I moved my thing off the screen, so now I don't remember what my points were, but I think that's them. So I'll put the code in and stuff as the closing is happening.
Great, thanks, Taylor. Yeah, so maybe let's just pass it on to any last words, Tataya, John.
I'm really looking forward to being in the same room and using each other to refine ourselves as instruments and just having a lot of fun and sharing the immensity of tools that we have. So I'm excited to meet the group that is gathering and really to be together with this team in the same space. Yeah. Thank you.
I just came back a few weeks ago from an in-person retreat that I co-led with Guy Senstock and Kyle Koch, and these practices that I talk about and we all talk about, you can do them online, and they are powerful, overwhelming evidence for that. But there's an extra dimension, and I don't know, I won't really try to articulate it here. There's this extra more when you're in person that really can take things very deep. And so I'm very excited about getting to participate in person again.
Yeah, I'm flying halfway around the world to do this, and I'm excited about it. I'm so stoked to be back in Toronto, um, and I can't think of a better reason to do that.
Uh, Taylor, any last things? It looks like you want to say something before I stop.
I was just like, hang on, are you waiting for me? Because I was just typing into the chat the information. I'll name it here. The other thing is the thing I forgot to mention is we have a couples discount. But because we're down to the last few spots, just reach out on the ATM contact form there just to check to make sure if you want to take advantage of that, that we still have two spots available. And in closing, yeah, we're in the home stretch here, less than 3 weeks away. I'm just so looking forward to doing this, to executing this. Been very excited about this for some time. I'm generally a fairly impatient person, so it's going to be fairly difficult for me over the next couple of weeks, like just constantly like looking at the clock. I've noticed in so many ways, like I just, in the evening, like I don't want to watch TV. I'd rather just go to bed to like tick the day one day closer, because there's just something, a lot of efforts going into this and everything else. So, I just want the sort of the fruits of the labor, and you get to meet a number of people also, who are on the participant list who I've only known online. Well, basically that's most of them. So I'm looking forward to meeting some of those people in person, just sharing space with them, grabbing lunch or dinner with some of them. I just, yeah, looking forward to being in Philea together with all of you.
So thank you, Taylor, for all the work you're putting into organizing this, and thank you, Ethan, for shepherding us through today. Much appreciated, and thank you to Taya.
Thank you.